Welcome to the next episode of Extreme Leadership Podcast. I'm Scott Kress, and today we've got my good buddy Ray Zahab is going to be our guest today. And I think we have a great conversation. Excited to talk to Ray about his experiences as an expeditioner, as an adventurer, and an endurance athlete. Ray's done so many amazing things, it's kind of hard to know where to start. One of the things that I find kind of interesting about Ray is that he loves both the cold of the polar and the heat of the desert, which for me, I can't take the heat of the desert. I love the cold, but I can't do the heat. And so Ray is kind of an anomaly. He can do both ends of the temperature spectrum there. But one of the things that I think defines Ray the most is his endless energy, his passion, and his optimism. And I think that's an amazing trait to have. So it's great to have you with us here today, Ray. So let's get started.
Honored to be here, super stoked, and frozen just looking at that photo behind you of one of
Yeah,
your Arctic
that's the
expeditions.
most recent South Pole picture.
Wow.
We were very fortunate to have a professional photographer who just happened to be there. And he said, "Hey, do you want to take our picture?" And I said, "Yeah, it'd be amazing." So we had a great picture rather than just a selfie at the South
Yeah,
Pole.
yeah,
We got a
exactly.
real picture, which was great. So before we get into the topics of leadership and team building, I want you all to get to know a little bit more about Ray. Pretty amazing guy, pretty interesting guy, very accomplished. So let's start off, Ray, because you were not always an expeditioner and an endurance athlete, and I think you came into this, in kind of in a unique way. So maybe kind of tell us, how this all started for you. Why did this start? Where did it begin?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I did sort of come to this somewhat late, one would say, to doing these kind of things. I'm not a lifelong athlete. As a matter of fact, until I was the age of 30, more or less, I was pack a day, sometimes two pack a day smoker, pretty unhealthy guy. And I wish it was a much more dramatic story, but the truth be told, I just was sick of living a life that seemed purposeless and without passion and that sort of thing. And, I wasn't making any money. I was perpetually broke. I was always like, I was just jumping from one thing to the next, kind of bouncing around. And I have a brother, a younger brother, who's an incredible endurance athlete. And he, at this time in my life, 20 years ago, 20 some odd, oh God, we're getting close to 25 years ago, there was this guy, my younger brother, who was so inspiring to me just by the
Mm,
things he was doing. And he was one of these people that exuded that confidence that we see in many of the people that do the things that we like to do. That I thought, geez, I'd like to feel the way he does. And this is a time, you got to remember, before social media, before, and we were on the internet, but I mean, we weren't like, sourcing inspiration per se on a day-to-day basis or on a minute-to-minute basis like we do nowadays through social media. So I had this real life example of someone who was very inspiring to me. And as a matter of fact, was a great leader. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to give his life a try
yeah,
and see where it leads me. And the rest, they say, is history,
yeah,
and that's how I got into it.
cool. So what was your, you kind of, you started into some endurance stuff and then you moved into some expeditions. What was your first big uh, expedition or adventure that you can, think back to?
Yeah. So I transitioned, I would say, this life of, pack a day smoker, heavy drinking, partying guy to, outdoors person in 2000 ish. And then became a competitive mountain biker very quickly. I realized genetically I had the same engine as my brother. And as soon as I started treating my
Yeah,
body 180 degrees in a different direction, you start to feel really great. And I
yeah.
could ride my bike for hours. So anyway, I raced bikes, I did ultra marathons, was a competitive ultra runner. And then in 2006 through 2007, spent 111 days with two friends of mine running 7,500 kilometers across the Sahara Desert, coast to coast. So that was the first true expedition that I'd
Yeah.
ever done. An interesting point, I was telling this to someone the other day. At the halfway point of that expedition, I ran the math because you have a lot of time when you're running an average of 70K a day for 111 days. You have a lot of time to think. And I would run the math on footsteps I was taking, like how much
Yeah.
time I was spending on my feet. And halfway through the Sahara, I'd spent more time on my feet moving than I had in my entire life up to that point. So I didn't know what was going to happen in the second
Yeah.
half.
Yeah. So you jumped right into it with 2 feet. Go big. No warms up with small trips. Just go right across the Sahara.
Yeah, right across it,
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about memorable. What is one of your most memorable expeditions or adventures, and why? And would it be that first one, or would there be something else that pops to mind?
Well, it's the same answer that I have when someone asks me, what's the hardest expedition yet? Well, it's the one I just did, right? Because it's the freshest in memory.
Yeah.
So I've done over 40 expeditions, close to 20,000 kilometers on my feet or on skis or otherwise, or crawling across the hottest and coldest places on the planet. So I've spent a lot of time out there. Look, and I got a lot of diverse memories
Yeah.
of expeditions, almost having close calls, for example, or close calls with the environment, close calls with wildlife. I've had crazy things happen on expeditions, but I have to say, I think probably the most memorable expedition memory that I have is just most recently being with my daughters in the Atacama Desert
Yeah.
in summer, camped at 8,000 feet on a mountain pass, winds at 100 kilometers an hour. It's 40 degrees Celsius. We're hanging on to the tents, trying not to blow away. And I'm thinking, this is it. Like, it's really going off out here. But I'm doing this with my family, and I have to say that's my most relevant and recent memory, but I've got millions that we could talk about.
Yeah. And your girls seem to have gotten those athletic genes from you as well, and they're both pretty accomplished, aren't they?
Well, their mom, fortunately, is a great athlete and a really good ultra runner. So they're into everything. They're into a little
Yeah.
bit of everything, as your kids are, as your son. Your son's an incredible skier. My daughters are into sprint kayak, sprint canoe, Nordic skiing, biathlon, trail running, and these sorts of things. So yeah, I mean, I'm stoked. I'm more stoked that they like to do the things that we don't do as a family,
Mm.
and they're finding their own identity
Yeah.
in the things that they do.
Right. And through all this kind of adventure, you've built a business around adventure, impossible to possible. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so it's two-pronged what I do. So Impossible to Possible has been going since 2008. It's a US 501c3. It's a nonprofit charity in the United States, and it is a nonprofit here in Canada. I live in Quebec as a nonprofit in Canada. And what we do for the last, goodness gracious, I think we're at 16 expeditions, is we bring
Mhm.
young people, 3, 4, 5 young people at a time, between the ages of 16 and 21, on an expedition to some remote part of the world, the Arctic, Tunisia, the Amazon jungle, wherever.
Yeah.
And over the course of a week, they do their own expedition, 100% cost free, and they learn about a subject while they're out there on expedition. That subject then, through film and photography and their own voices, is shared across satellite to classrooms all over the world. So it's peer-to-peer learning, and it's an experiential learning program. And as I mentioned, the entire thing is 100% free, and we're all volunteers. On the other side of that, I have a business called Capic One. And like you, I guide clients on expeditions all over the
Yeah.
world. Typically, I know you spend a lot of time guiding clients into very cold regions of the planet. And I typically, with our Capricorn One expeditions, the majority of them happen in sort of the warmer environments, in
Right.
deserts and that sort of thing.
Very neat. And maybe can you share with us some of your expedition plans that are coming up in the future? I know there might be some that you're still working on, but anything you can share with us?
Yeah, so I'm working on 3 projects right now. One of which I'll mention right away because no jinxing. It's the next one up, so I'm okay. The other two, I'm too afraid to talk about yet. But I'll be in the Mojave Desert in Death Valley in July this year, trying to complete a project that I tried to do last year, coming off of chemo, which I know you'll probably ask me about later. And so this year I'm excited to go after it. I'm training really hard. I'm leaving no stone unturned. I am really putting my everything into this. And it's traveling north to south through the Mojave Desert, Death Valley in particular, at the hottest time of year. Self-contained and solo.
Yeah. And so what's the distance for that?
It'll be less than 200 kilometers
Yeah.
if my navigation is clean. And I'm I'm not a, I don't want to put a number out there on how long. I can tell you this. I did do this once before,
Yeah.
many years ago, and it took 4.5 days. I'd like to go a lot faster than that, you
Yeah.
know. And the reason it took that long is because the terrain, there's no trails or anything. The terrain is brutal and the navigation is tricky, and it is oppressively hot. I mean, it's in the high 50s with a headwind.
Yeah.
So it's hot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know how you keep moving forward in those temperatures. Good on you. So let's transition into some leadership stuff now. Uh, in these extreme environments, teamwork and leadership are critical. So, what do you think are some of the traits of that a great leader has? Thinking about whether thinking about an expedition environment, an endurance environment, or even from your business experiences. What are traits that you think a great leader brings with them?
You know, I don't want to sound silly here, but it's almost an easy question to answer. And I'll tell you why I say that.
Yeah.
You know, as part of my job, I speak all over the world. I have been speaking professionally since 2007. I mean, I've been to so many large corporations and small corporations and companies and nonprofits and special events all over the world. You get to meet a lot of really successful people. And the thing that I have noticed in great leaders, whether they're CEOs or CMOs or they're expedition leaders or they're whatever, the number one trait that exists in every single one of these people that's reached the upper echelon is humility,
Mhm.
is a willingness to listen to what other people have to say, being comfortable enough in their own skin to not be threatened by the success of others, but rather celebrate the success of others. And I find that in each of these people that has achieved such great success and is a great leader or a great motivator to others that they're trying to lead down a certain path, whether it be in the backcountry or it be in the boardroom, uh, is that ability to really clearly communicate and gain people's trust through the realization, because it is a reality, that they're just like everyone else in that room, or they're just like everyone else at that camp. They just may have a little more experience to share, or a little more wisdom, or a little more time on the trail. So humility is the number one leadership trait, I think, that positions someone to be a great leader.
And you mentioned, that really helps to build trust within that relationship. Besides, the opposite of humility, kind of having an overbearing ego, perhaps. Are there other things you think a leader could do that would break down that trust?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the opposite of that, if you're someone who is closed-minded, or if
Mhm.
you're someone who is unwilling to entertain the concerns of others, or is completely set in their ways, that they're unwilling to adapt and evolve into a situation, then that role as leader is diminished because you lack then the capacity to clearly communicate back and forth. You may have the right idea, but if you don't have the other person's mind open to what that idea is, then they don't hear what the idea is. And right away, there's the collapse in the communication back and forth. So from the get, you have to be able to have a relationship with the people you're working with in order that they trust that communication. So if you're someone who, oh, I know it all, well, you're going to listen to me, or we're going to do it this way, or whatever, right away, even though you may be right, you're not going to be able to
Yeah.
communicate that to the other person and have them listen and pick up on the message and therefore follow you. Right.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the importance of relationship, and that's one of the things that we focus on a lot within our training programs. I always say that relationship is the foundation of all high performance teams. It's about building those connections with one another. So sometimes you get together with people, and you have to build a team very, very quickly. These are people maybe who you don't know very well previously, and you have to get to know them. Do you have any tricks or strategies or ways that you can recommend that really helps to build a team quickly?
Well, look at it, there's the one piece, the one element of building a team that can never be sort of diminished, and that's time. I mean,
Mhm.
you just over human beings by nature, we spend time with each other, we get to know each other's nuances and intricacies, and the way we each operate, and we build bonds, or we, decide who we're going to be closer to, et cetera. That just happens over time, and you can't rush that. That's just going to happen, right? I would say, though, fast tracking, trying to build a cohesive team is creating activities whereby which people get together and have to collaborate in a way that makes them slightly uncomfortable, but everybody's slightly uncomfortable. Yeah. And in that discomfort together, you build a quicker bond, right? Because you find solutions to that discomfort together.
Yeah. So if you think about some of those, your impossible to possible expeditions, you're getting together a diverse group of people, youth from different parts of the country, different backgrounds, different experiences. So what would you say are the keys to, really creating, developing, managing, leading that high performance team, for the duration of that expedition?
Well, with both CAPIC 1, guiding clients, or the youth expeditions, I would say this applies, is that I make sure the person knows going into it that simply by committing to the challenge, by committing to it right up front, you have put your skin in the game. You're invested already into it by committing. So the commitment has been made. Now, what can we do to that commitment? How can we nurture it so that it becomes a successful outcome that you want it to be? Because as you very well know, when you're on expedition, your ideas go from A to B, but a lot of things happen between A and B. And the line is never straight. It's routinely zigzagged. My wife says, she reminds me every time I'm making an expedition budget. See, she said, got your budget done? Yes, I got my budget done. Add 20%, because you never know what's going to happen. So it's being prepared on the way from A to B to be able to do that zigzag. So what does that mean when you're building a team? Well, it means you may think your role is going to be X, Y, or Z, but it may be A, B, or C. It may become something completely different, because things may happen. Barriers may arise, challenges may come about, and you may have to reinvent yourself several times on that team. But you got to keep that open mind in order to do that, to reinvent yourself, reinvent your role, and keep finding yourself a position on that team as you're on that journey.
Yeah, it's always being flexible, being adaptable, and really being aware of what's happening in the moment, not being so focused on the end goal that you lose track of what's happening in the moment. And you
100%.
You mentioned change a bunch in there, which we'll get to in a minute. But before we get to change, I'd like to hear a story. Because you're such a great storyteller. Can you think of a time and share of the story where teamwork made the difference between success and failure?
Yes, I've got so many that I get, but there's one in particular. It was a youth expedition we were doing in the Canadian Arctic many years ago, and we were dropped at one point. We were to be picked up at another point. You got to get to the other side. You got to work together. You got to get to the other side. So you've got these 5 kids that are from completely different backgrounds with 50-pound backpacks on. And they're making their way across Baffin Island, the region of Baffin Island that I'm talking about. And they're making their way through this mountain pass. And one of the youth ambassadors, one of the team members said, I cannot do another step. I cannot do this. It's too hard. I cannot go any further. And they said, I need to be rescued, basically. I can't, I got to go back. I need to be rescued. And so the team, the youth ambassadors, they all got together and they said, let's discuss. We're not going to say no. Okay, if we need to push the button, we'll push the button. But let's sit down. Let's talk about what's happening in this moment. So why do you feel you can't? Because my feet are killing me. My legs are so sore. Why are your legs so sore? My backpack is unbearably heavy. Hold on a sec. The backpack's like, okay, can we find a solution here? So what these 5 young people did, it was extraordinary. They took the gear from this person. They said, how about this? Let's do one more day before we push the button. But here's the deal. We'll push the button at the end of the day. If you let us split up your gear, each 5 of us will take a piece of your gear, which doesn't really increase our gear weight that much more. You go with a very light pack and keep an open mind to trying this reinvented way of moving on the land. And let's see how you do.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm willing to try that. I'm pushing the emergency button at the end of the day. Get to the end of the day. All right, are we ready to push the button? Why are we pushing the button? I feel fantastic. So the moral of the story, right? You work together collaboratively in that instance as a team to help that person along who's as valuable a team member, whether they're carrying or not, because that person
Yeah.
who gave up all their gear could be the person carrying all of the gear the next day, right?
Yeah. We've all got, we all have good days, we all have bad days.
Yeah,
And that team supports you, when you need the support. That's a big part of being a team. And I think that really shows the commitment and the building of relationship as well. So, let's get
absolutely.
back into that change because, you talked a lot about change. Things never go exactly as you think they're going to go. So when a dramatic change occurs, how do you as a leader process it first? And then how do you share it with the team?
Well, everything that we experience, whether we're on expedition or in a leadership role, um, everything that we experience in these things that we do, these are things that have a lens on them. It's like you got a zoom lens. Everything is magnified. Food tastes magnified different.
Yeah.
Coffee tastes magnified different on expedition. Decisions and the outcome of the decision is magnified. But all of these things happen in everyday life.
Yeah.
You're going to the grocery store. I got a flat tire. What the hell am I going to do? You got to stop. But I got a meeting in an hour. How am I going to make all this work? You find the solution. You find the solution because it's a real life,
Yeah.
everyday occurrence. I like to say with folks that I'm working with, everything we experience in our everyday life and that automatic ability to decision make on the fly is what we apply when we're on expedition, we're in the boardroom, wherever we are. We apply that same decision making process to the things that we're doing. So if something, the challenges that we come up against. So if we're on an expedition and something goes haywire, we immediately stop and we work together. So, all right, everybody, listen, we got a sandstorm coming in. Here's the deal. We were going to set camp 15 kilometers from here. We got to stop right now. All of us have to work together right away to get the biggest tent up. Let's peg that one out because we could all get into it in worst case scenario. And then let's work on all these smaller tents and all work together collaboratively like ants to build things up really quickly so that we can be safe and stop and then make a decision on when we can move again.
Yeah. So as a leader, you are acknowledging the situation, remaining calm yourself, and then guiding the group through a process to let's find a solution to this. And
Absolutely, because there
yeah,
always is a solution. There
yeah,
always is
yeah,
a solution. Even if the solution means pushing the button,
yeah.
that's the solution in that moment. There
Mm.
is no, I like to say this, I learned this from a friend of mine who has another podcast in the US, and there is no fail. There's only a first attempt in learning,
Mm.
right? And so you learn as you make your way and
Yeah.
you never stop learning. And I think that's another, to go back to the first question of the day, it's another great trait in leadership is within humility to realize that we never stop learning as we're on the path. So even as a leader in a leadership role, you can always learn more. Henceforth, you're very successful at leading leadership groups and giving people the strategies, companies, et cetera,
Mm.
to take these leadership tools and implement them. Why? Because you're a guy who goes and does these incredible things all over the planet and you've never stopped learning. And you come home and you've learned something new.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to show you this, And so that's what leadership is.
Yeah, and I think that's a amazing thing that you and I both have, and I think that we're very fortunate to have is to have these experiences and then share these learnings and these insights with other people who don't have the opportunity or even want the opportunity to do some of the things that we've done, but they can still gain a lot from it that can apply to their everyday lives. When I'm doing some of my keynote speaking, I often tell a story about a particular failure on a mountain where it was a disaster. Nobody even got close to the summit. And that was one of the richest learning experiences I ever had. We did not achieve our goal, but from a leadership perspective, a team perspective, a personal perspective, I learned more from failure than I think I would have learned from success.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. And that then goes back to the first attempt in learning
yeah,
acronym, right?
exactly.
Through the things that we don't succeed, we learn way more. And at the time, it stings. At the
Yeah,
time, it stings.
yeah.
But after, in retrospect, you think to yourself, God, you know what? I learned X, Y, or Z. And that will never happen again, because I
Yeah.
learned this piece.
I think this also goes
So,
back to what you started with is that humility. You need to be humble enough to recognize that that you played a part in whatever the outcome was, and then to have your eyes open to that learning experience, and that way you can digest the information, look at what you can take from it, and then apply to the future.
And Scott, and to that as a leader, hearing what others say that may be peripherally experts in that certain area. I don't know if you saw the latest the movie there, the Academy Award. It was nominated this year for Academy Award. May have won it actually. About why am I drawing a blank on the guy who built the atomic bomb, hydrogen bomb?
Oppenheimer.
Oppenheimer. And
Yes.
so when Oppenheimer was in that, when they brought all the scientists in, he was surrounded by other scientists that were better, or I would say more experienced in certain fields of study than he was. So
Mhm.
there's a mathematician, an expert
Yeah.
in math. He wasn't a math guy, but he had a math guy. So when I was crossing Kamchatka with my Italian teammate, Stefano Gregoretti, in winter 2019, it was a winter expedition. It was from the beginning, uh, absolutely way more difficult than we thought it was going to be. Snow conditions, we just for a multitude of reasons, the toughest 20 days unsupported I'd ever spent on the land.
Yeah.
And we crossed this mountain range, and we were on our way down the last 150 or so kilometers. The other side was minus 40 on one side of this mountain range. We're on our way down the other side of these mountains. We would have one more small mountain range to cross, and then we'd be at the coast. Expedition complete. And upon reaching the summit of this mountain, it was the first time we'd seen anyone in 20 days. Our photographer was up there, my buddy John, and he said, "Hey, you know what? They came up in a snowcat, and from the other side, and he said, 'Hey, listen, when you get to the bottom of the mountain, we'll be waiting. We got to talk to you.'" Okay, kind of ominous. We ski down the mountain, go 15 kilometers, and on the other side, and now we're in striking distance. We're like, I don't even remember, maybe 100 kilometers from the eastern coast of Kamchatka, and John's there with a bunch of hunters, and it's unbelievably warm. It was like maybe 3-4 degrees Celsius. Above, all the streams were open, and the hunter said to us in Russian, "You can't continue anymore. All of the rivers and streams on the eastern side of Kamchatka had opened up." And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I have just destroyed my body, Stefano and I, for the last 20 days in minus 40-degree weather, in 1.5 meters of snow. And we're like horses racing for the barn, and we're sure we're going to make it. And I'm being told that it's a completely different weather pattern on the eastern side and the expedition is over. But you know what? In that moment, I had a decision to make. And it was, well, do I just go ahead and see for myself?
Yeah.
And maybe put others at risk that would have to come and rescue me? Or do I listen to experts in this area? These are the indigenous people of this region. And I said to myself, it was a no-brainer. I looked at Steph and I said, expedition's over, because these guys are telling us it's over. And so sometimes we have to be very aware, not only of our surroundings, but listen to the people around us who may be experts in a certain area, and take that in as a leader to make a hard decision.
Yeah. And, again, going back to being humble, setting the ego aside, and trusting in the skills and the insights and the experiences of others.
Yeah.
Which, this kind of brings us to my next topic I want to talk about is resilience. Obviously, in an expedition environment, resilience is key to be able to get up day after day and to plow through horrible conditions and to deal with things you weren't expecting. And you've also had some personal challenges over the last few years that have required a lot of resilience from you. And so maybe you just talk to us a little bit about, how do you stay resilient? How do you help others be resilient in the face of, very, very difficult challenges?
Well, recently I gave a presentation, and someone asked me in the Q&A section, after someone asked me, they said, when it gets very tough physically on these expeditions, your day 15, 20, 25 on your expedition, how do you keep going? Like, how do you get over that physical, almost sickness? You're so, exhausted. And I said, well, let me say this to you. When we choose to take something on, a challenge, or do something really difficult, we accept the terms of the contract that it is going to be extraordinarily difficult. In the case of an expedition, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult physically, mentally, and emotionally. And you have to accept those terms when you sign the contract. When you're going to go and do this thing, you know this is going to happen. Now, last year, as you alluded to, I had it's a longer story, which I won't waste all the backstory on, but I was diagnosed with a rare form of a blood cancer, incurable, but very treatable. And it would mean several rounds of chemotherapy and monoclonal therapy over the course of 6 months. And going into this, I was thinking, oh man, your life stops, right? And I thought to myself, well, I could sit on the couch, do the treatments, sit on the couch, and in between treatments and just eat chips all day. And there'd be nothing wrong with that. Who's going to fault me for that, right? But I thought to myself, no, you know what? I've learned a lot from doing hard things. And you know what I want to do? I'm going to do my chemo. So I do 2 days of chemo, 3 sessions over 2 days. I'd be very sick for a couple of days after. Then my wife would get me moving, walk down the road where we live, 500 meters, and that would be my day to start. And from that moment, I would have roughly 23 days before my next round of treatments. And I would say to myself, I'm going to get myself in the best shape I can so that when I go into the next chemo, maybe I'll be less sick coming out of the next end of it.
Yeah.
And to get me motivated over these 23 days, I'm going to train my ass off and I'm going to go do something. I'm going to go do something epic. And with the blessing of the doctors and all that jazz, I would go off and I'd go and do something. I went to the Arctic in February. I went and I'd do these things. Maybe not to the same level that I was doing them, when I was not full of cancer and being treated for cancer, but I was doing things. And I think that it's the way we perceive our reality and how we're willing to take it on is what resilience is all about. Resilience is a word that gets used a lot. Being resilient doesn't necessarily mean being tough. It doesn't really have to be about that. Being resilient means being cagey. It means thinking about what we're doing and finding the best way around it, using good old-fashioned human ingenuity, a little bit of sweat to find the best way to deal with the situation. That's what resiliency is, because you go and ski to the South Pole, you're going to suffer every day skiing to the South Pole, but you agreed to those terms because you want to ski to the South Pole. So find the best way to make that happen,
Yeah. Yeah. I often talk about with groups, with them, what's in it for me? You need to know what's in it for you, and what are the things that motivate you? What are the things that inspire you? And for you, it's this positivity that you have, and then using that goal, setting that goal to keep you focused on something moving forward. Yes, it's very easy to sit on the couch and eat chips. That's why, so many of us need to have this goal, something that we're working towards that keeps us motivated and gives us a reason to get out of bed and to suffer through the tough times every now and then. So, so how do you have somebody who's on an expedition and they're suffering. How do you as a leader help them to be resilient, to pick it up and keep going?
Well, it depends on the person. It depends on the
Mm,
personality. Because I think what's really critical, going back to the original part of the expedition or the conversation, sorry, is that we've established, hopefully by this point, some sort of rapport
yeah.
and a relationship. And so I know that person's personality and I know what ticks with that person because I'm open-minded to that person and they're on my team. And so because of that, I'm able to work with them within their strengths to find a solution to the way they're feeling right now.
Mm.
So it's working with that person so that, if you will, Scott, the idea is coming from them. The solution's coming from them. It's not coming from me. So it's the way the conversation goes. It's the dynamic of the moment that if I have someone that's struggling, I get them to find the solution and tell me what the solution is so that we can move forward from there. I think that's really, really important when working with someone who's struggling, because to diminish their struggle, if I was just to say to them, only the first part, well, you chose to come, so you knew it was going to be hard. That's not what it's about. Of course, that conversation's had. We had, hey, we're all suffering. This is brutal. This is really tough. But right now you're struggling more. I get that. What can we do? Let's talk about it. Like, do you have some ideas? Like, what do you think? Do we need to cut our mileage today? Do we need to set camp now? Like, what do you think is the right thing to do right now? And listening and hearing what they have to say and making that come from them and the decision come from them, even though you may be implanting that decision. Do you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying?
Yeah. It's like, again, going back to that whole relationship, knowing people, and you're going to lead every person a little bit differently. And then the other thing I take from that is that as leader, your job is not necessarily always to tell people what to do. You don't have to have all of the answers. It's about helping that person, it's about coaching that person to discover the best solution that works for them and works for the rest of
I,
the team.
I 100% agree with that. And I think that coming with that open-minded attitude, hearing what others have to say, we can learn from that person. And it's a much different thing if you're guiding one person alone or you're guiding a group. I like to, when we're guiding client groups, they're never larger than about 8 people.
Yeah.
Because I find that there's something that you get with 8 people that you don't get with 800 people, and that's something called intimacy. If you take a group of 100 people into the jungle,
Yeah.
and you're camped for a week, that group will break up into small subgroups. Just what happens. It's human dynamic. So I like to create that smaller group going into the field in the first place. Or if I'm working with larger groups in a leadership setting, I break it up into smaller groups.
Yeah.
And then those smaller groups, like cellular functioning in the body, can make amazing things happen.
Yeah. So we're going to start to wrap it up in a moment here, but one more story. Tell us one more story about teamwork, where teamwork leadership made the difference in an expedition, really helped you to achieve something pretty cool.
Well, we were crossing the Namib Desert. Again, I was with, this was not a solo expedition. This was with Stefano Gregoretti. And it was 1,850 kilometers from South African border to the Angolan border. And on the ground, we had to deal not only with extreme temperatures, but also wildlife, which was extreme. I mean, there's lions everywhere, right? Just for example. I mean, a million other things as well.
Yeah.
And at one point, we'd come across a canyon. And the way around the canyon would have added 140 kilometers to that 1,850. Going across was a considerable less distance. I think it was about 32 kilometers across this canyon. But it meant dropping down a few thousand feet, climbing out a few thousand feet. So what we did was we worked as a team to find the best way to scale down the side of this mountain, because there was just no way down to get down into this canyon. We decided that was the route we were going to take. So the guy who was shooting film for us, like doing these little vignettes of Namibia that were being uploaded to a live website for schools to follow, he took his drones and he flew it out over the edge as we descended. And we would descend and set a route. And this was the night before we were going to make the big day. And we would come back up and he'd say, look at guys, just based on looking at the film footage from the drone. So we were all had a hand in this, in how we were going to make 140K into 32K and successfully, continue our route without having to break the route. That was his piece. Our buddies who worked logistics in that area, they would go around to the other side of the canyon that night and scout from the other edge, checking out the other side. Come back the next morning, early in the morning before we left, and say, guys, if you could set this bearing and you can hit that side of the canyon, you have a better shot of getting out on the other side. So we all worked together, even though they weren't, feet on the ground in that canyon. Their participation with us helped us together, everybody's pieces together, to get us across the canyon. We successfully crossed.
Again, going back to being open and, open to listening to what other people have to say, open to the contributions of others. So as we start to wrap it up, what would you say are, if you could say, a couple of key words that leaders need to keep in mind to build high performance teams, to achieve great things, to overcome challenges? How would you sum it all up? A couple of keywords for leaders.
Well, a couple of keywords. I mean, the best I can do is, I talk a lot. I would say, the humility factor, I think is a huge one. That's far and away for me. I think number one, keeping an open mind to others, which is and an inclusive nature, which as well is sort of part of that humility aspect. But I think another thing is never underestimate what the capacity of someone is. When you first meet someone, your role as a leader as well is to nurture the extraordinary out of that person. right? It's in there. It's in every single one of us.
Yeah.
Just can you pull it out of that person? I think that's another key thing for leaders to think about as they're putting together their groups or they're getting ready for their mission or whatever it is that to expect a little bit the unexpected of what people are capable of performing, what level they're able to perform to. And I would say lastly, and probably equally as important, is never underestimate as well the barrier of challenge that people face in their day-to-day lives and what they bring to the team from their day-to-day experiences, right? So when they come onto a team, they're coming with a set of values, a set of concepts of right and wrong, a set of, oh, I can do this or I can't do this. Everything is preconceived when they get on that team. Now, let's look back. Let's talk about life. Let's talk, what's your life like? Let's talk about those things and figure out where best to put these people and how to work together so that we can start to peel away some of those barriers they think they have and bring them up,
Yeah. It's really, a lot of what you're talking about is being that servant leader. The servant leader is there to help bring the best out in everybody, getting to know those individuals and to help nurture all the skills and the things that they bring to the table that builds the team. So that's all the time we got for today. But thanks, Ray, for spending a bit of time with us today. For our listeners, hope you enjoyed our conversation today. Hope you got some great insights from Ray's vast level of experience in all kinds of different challenges. And hopefully you come back and enjoy our next one and our next guest that we're gonna have. So thanks, Ray, for spending a bit of time with us today, and best of luck in your next expeditions.
Thanks, buddy. It's an honor to be here, and super fan of yours, and you know that. So we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Ray. Thanks.